You're listening to the Cyberwire Network, powered by N2K.
If you're monitoring DNS logs or have protection in place to look for dodgy things happening with regards to DNS, then you have a chance of detecting this kind of activity.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CyberWire's Hacking Humans podcast, where each week we look behind the social engineering scams, the phishing schemes, and the criminal exploits that are making headlines and taking a heavy toll on organizations around the world. I'm Dave Bittner from the CyberWire, and joining me is Joe Kerrigan from the Johns Hopkins University Information Security Institute. Hello, Joe.
Hi, Dave.
Got some good stories to share this week, and later in the show, my conversation with Alex Hinchliffe from Unit 42 at Palo Alto Networks. We're going to be discussing some of their ransomware research. All right, Joe, let's go ahead and jump into our stories this week. Why don't you start things off for us?
Dave, you ever been called in for jury duty?
I have.
Yeah.
Yes.
Me too.
I've been, yes, I have received the letter in the mail, I think probably a half a dozen times. Mm-hmm. I've only actually had to go in once. And went through the sorting process that they, like Harry Potter with the sorting hat, where the lawyers, decide if you're good.
Murder trial.
Right, exactly. And I think the moment the first couple syllables of the words journalist came out of my mouth, they were like, next. So I have never sat on a jury, but I have been summoned to do my civic duty.
It is our civic duty, as you said, Dave, to serve as a juror when called in the U.S. and other countries around the world. And in Maryland, if you fail to appear for jury duty when you're supposed to be there, there are penalties.
Yeah.
That can include a fine of up to $1,000 and 60 days in jail, or both.
Yeah.
Right? So you can be out $1,000 and 2 months.
I have to say, by the way, this has caused me anxiety once or twice. Where, like, what happens if they send you a letter and you just don't get it?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, then what, do they come knocking on your door? I don't know, but fortunately, I've never had to deal with.
You're
that.
still entitled to due process for missing jury duty, though.
Okay.
So you're not. You probably go before a judge and you say, "I never got the letter. I would absolutely comply with this." So
right. Okay. They don't just haul you off in handcuffs.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. Good.
But they may actually issue a warrant for your arrest. Right. And that's actually the crux of my story, because these penalties are real. Scammers take advantage of it. And there is a story on Scam Busters about a jury duty scam. So here's what happens. You get a phone call from somebody who says, I'm from the state government or I'm from the federal government, and you were supposed to appear for jury duty and didn't.
Oh, see? Yeah, there it is.
Right, exactly. It's so good. I love that we don't rehearse this before we start, right? We just talk about what we're going to talk about here. And this is exactly the fear that you were expressing just a moment ago.
Yeah.
Right? So you get this phone call and the guy on the other line says, you need to give me some information for verification purposes, right? And then the person starts asking for all kinds of information, like your name, your address, your birthday. Mm-hmm. Of course, they're going to say this is for verification purposes, right?
Right. Bank routing number,
Social security number,
Visa card number.
They may say that you've been charged with a crime and you have to pay a fine in Maryland, $1,000. So if you want to pay that over the phone right now, we can do that.
Right.
So give me your credit card number. It's very easy to see why this works because of exactly what you said. This is something that has always bugged you or sits in the back of your mind. And in fact, I'm sitting here thinking about it. You're telling me you've been called dozens of times, or at least gotten mail dozens of times. It's only happened to me once.
Or so you think.
Right, exactly. Now I'm nervous.
Right. Yeah, you're staying one step ahead of the law.
Right. I'm nervous about what happens next time I get pulled over, Mm-hmm. I have been pulled over a couple times recently, so, within the past couple of years.
Yeah.
And
old Leadfoot Kerrigan over there.
That's right, yeah. That's what they say.
Yeah.
But I have not had them say, they always ask, do you have any warrants out for your arrest? Right? And I always answer the same way. Not that I know of, but who knows?
Right.
Maybe there was a jury duty summons that I didn't get, and now there's a summons for failing to appear for jury duty.
Yeah.
So I don't know that there are any more. That's also an unnerving question. So when this call comes in, I mean, first off, no legitimate court system is going to ask you over the phone for sensitive information like your social security number, your date of birth, all that information.
Right.
If they do call you at all, they're going to say, you didn't appear for jury duty. You need to come down to the courthouse.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And I don't know what the process is at that point in time, but if that's if they do call you, but they're probably just going to send you another letter.
Right. A nastygram.
A nastygram, right.
Right.
But so when someone calls you, I've adopted this new policy, right? I started answering the car warranty calls.
Oh.
Right.
Okay.
And they say, our records indicate that your car is about to go out of warranty. And I say, well, what kind of car do I have? And they go, well, you have to tell us that. And I'm like, you say your records indicate my car is about to go out of warranty.
Yeah.
What do your records say about what my car is? Do the same thing here. You missed jury duty. Oh yeah? What's my name?
Right. Right.
Of course, that doesn't mean they don't have it, because there's all kinds of information about you out there. Like the T-Mobile breach, it would be very easy for someone to utilize that number and or that information to get your phone number and then know your name. So when you go, oh yeah, what's my name? They just go, oh, you're Joe Kerrigan. Oh,
right.
Yeah, I am
right.
Joe Kerrigan. Okay.
Here's your address.
Here's your address. Here's all your information.
Your email and your password.
Right.
Right.
So that information does exist, but I still would do it to have fun with these people.
Okay.
But be aware of the scam. If someone's calling you, telling you that you missed jury duty and you didn't get a summons, it's probably a scam.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. And boy, that like I said, I could totally see that playing into someone's anxiety, because that is a real anxiety that I have experienced before.
Right.
So, yeah, interesting. All right.
I'm experiencing it right now. All I can think about, I'll obsess about it for the rest of the day.
Well, just, straighten up, fly right, keep under the speed limit, and you won't run into any trouble, right? Keep your nose clean, Joe.
Hopefully.
Yeah. All right, good stuff, and we'll have a link to that story in the show notes, of course. My story this week comes from Wired, written by Lily Hay Newman. She always does great work over there at Wired. And it's titled, You Can Now Ditch the Password on Your Microsoft Account. You no longer need a long string of characters to access Windows and Office 365. So Microsoft for a while has offered passwordless access on their enterprise accounts.
Yes.
And now they're rolling it out for consumer accounts. And I think this is very interesting. So if you want to, right now it's opt-in. You can go in and basically get rid of your password and log into your Microsoft accounts using other means. I think this is
to see what the other means are.
Well, yes, and they do talk about that here. You can do, I believe you can do biometric if your hardware is capable of that.
Okay.
They will do, you can use your phone, your device,
right.
Sending you an indication on your device to verify that you're logging in. I mean, there's nothing exotic about the alternative means that they're using here. But basically, instead of using them as a second factor, they're using them as the primary factor.
Right.
You could use a YubiKey also, a hardware key. So
I like that one the best.
Yeah, so they have a number of options here. But I think this is interesting, first of all, that an organization as big as Microsoft, and by the way, I should mention Microsoft is a sometimes sponsor of the Cyberwire. They like us to mention that whenever we talk about a Microsoft story.
Right.
That someone as big as Microsoft is rolling this out, I wonder if this could be something that leads the way. That, you and I have asked many times, what would it take for folks to jettison passwords altogether? Mm-hmm. I think it would be interesting if this were a first step towards having the passwordless method be the default. Because yes. I don't think it is yet. I think right now it's just an option. But wouldn't it be interesting if passwords someday, soon, hopefully,
right.
become the option?
Yeah, we've been talking about ditching passwords for probably about a decade and a half now. Since, the mid-2000s, we've been talking about getting rid of passwords because they're awful and we're not good at using them as humans.
Right.
And it is a holdover like email from the late 60s, early 70s. It was never envisioned to be used on an internet-wide scale.
Yeah.
Right? It was just envisioned as a way to stop people from using all the time on a time-shared system. And when you take something that's not designed to scale and scale it, then you have all kinds of problems. And we, of course, have had all kinds of problems with passwords. So, yeah, we've been thinking about jettisoning passwords, and now Microsoft doing this is great. I'm not a big fan of biometrics. I've said that frequently.
Yeah.
Mainly because they're immutable.
Right.
You know, you can't ever change them.
Right.
And that may or may not be bad, but if it becomes possible to reproduce a biometric signature and spoof a biometric signature, that's going to be a problem.
Yeah.
If any biometric protocol gets hacked, thus it's going to be an issue.
Yeah.
Of course, you can change the protocol once that vulnerability is discovered, but I still don't like it. The using a phone device, I'd like to know how that works. I'd like to know the technical details of that, because if it's, let's say I have a Microsoft app on my phone that I'm logged into, and that app is what provides the input to me that somebody's trying to log into my account. Is that me? Well, how am I going to log into that account or into that app? Do I have to use a password on that app?
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like passwords don't really go away in that sense. Using a YubiKey is the option I like the best, because it uses universal two-factor, which is a public key, private key scheme. That key is generated on the fly, actually. The YubiKey doesn't store the private key. It generates it based on who you're asking, who's on which website you're going to, and a secret that it has inside. But the only thing Microsoft stores in that case is a public key, which is fine if that gets breached. It doesn't matter. And actually, that public key is only good for Microsoft. It would not be good anywhere else.
Yeah.
With the way universal two-factor works.
Yeah.
So I like that option much better. So if you're going to do this, use a YubiKey. Go out and buy a couple of YubiKeys, 2 or 3 of them, and set them all up to be used with this.
Yeah, I use LastPass as my password manager, and they have a system with your mobile device. For example, if I'm logging into LastPass on my desktop machine, the second factor is the mobile app on my phone. And all it does is pops up a little window on my phone that says, "Is this you trying to log in on the desktop?" And I just say, "Yep." And that's it.
That's good.
And I'm in. Yeah.
Google does that too with a lot of their stuff, but you have to log into the phone initially.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So
I do like the biometrics on my iPhone. I think Face ID is very convenient. I like the way that it is stored on device in the secure enclave. So I think it's a good balance between security and not, that Apple does not actually have my biometric information.
Right.
It's just
If someone wanted to argue biometrics with me, I'm okay. If you want to do that, I wouldn't say that's bad, especially with Face ID. Face ID is remarkably strong.
Yeah.
For a biometric, it's of course built into the Apple hardware,
right?
Like you're saying, but not just the storage of the secret, but the generation. In order for you to generate something, you have to be in front of the camera. The camera has to actually sense your pulse, which is remarkable to me.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of features built into Face ID.
Yeah. Yeah, and it just works. Which
it does.
Is
that's
the trick.
That's
right?
Apple, right? Everything just works.
Right. All right. Well, I think this is a really interesting development from Microsoft here, and they have the scale and the clout certainly to lead the way on something like this. So. This article points out that they already have 200 million passwordless users on the enterprise side. So they've had the ability to really test this out and make sure that it's going to work. There's a nice quote here from Brett Arsenault, who is Microsoft's Chief Information Security Officer. He said, "You think that everyone hates passwords, but there is one faction of people who love passwords. They're called criminals." I think that's right.
Yeah.
I think that's right. So if that's something we could take out of the equation, out of the ecosystem, it seems like a good thing to me. All right, we'll have a link to that story in our show notes. And of course, we would love to hear from you. If you have something you'd like us to cover, you can email us to hackinghumans@thecyberwire.com. All right, Joe, it is time to move on to our catch of the day.
Dave, our catch of the day comes from Lucio, who's sent us catch of the days before, I think. But he sent us a bunch of stuff today. First off, he says he listens every week, so we appreciate that. Thank
Very
you,
nice.
Lucio.
Thank you.
And he wanted to thank us for recommending sites for learning more about cybersecurity. Lucio says he does use Cybrary.
Okay.
That's kind of hard to say, Cybrary.
Cybrary, yeah.
Right. He thinks the price is pretty reasonable. It costs about $20 a month if you pay for an annual subscription. He does say there are no refunds, so you can't get a prorated. If you quit 6 months in, you're not getting half your money back.
Okay.
They do have a 7-day trial.
Yeah.
So Lucio says it's pretty good.
Yeah, not a terribly high risk there if you want to check it out. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
He sent us a text message that he received, as well as some other stuff we'll get to in a minute. But Dave, why don't you read this text message?
All right. It goes like this. Hey there, sorry to keep messaging you, but we only have 7 brain pill samples left. These prevent dementia, boost your IQ in minutes, improve focus and concentration, improve memory by 350%, reverse the effects of aging, supercharged energy booster, feel young again. Remember, you're going to love it. Grab that free sample. You owe it to yourself. You only live once. Feel young forever. Read this article. Click here.
Lucio didn't go on to click the article, or click the link, which is good.
Yeah.
It's good. This is probably just a spam message,
Mm-hmm.
but I like it. Boost your IQ in minutes, improve memory by 350%.
Yeah.
There's an old Far Side where a salesman's talking to a guy who looks like his faculties are less than average.
Yeah.
And the guy goes, double my IQ, I'm in, or something. Reminds me of that.
Okay. Very nice. Very nice.
I thought I'd throw that in there.
Yeah,
but,
I mean, this is something here for everyone.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, just I'll be smarter, I'll have more energy, I'll feel young again, better memory.
You'll feel young forever, Dave. That's a pretty bold promise.
Forever is a long time.
Right.
Forever
Like,
is a long time.
Do you show up and it's like the Lost Boys and they make you into a vampire?
What if it just kills you? It reminds me of that joke about... Joe, did you know that there's a mushroom that if you eat it, it will provide sustenance to you for the rest of your life?
No. Tell me about this mushroom, Dave.
Well, it'll kill you, so the rest of your life won't be very long. Right. That's the joke. All right. Well, our thanks to Lucio for sending that in. Again, you can write us at hackinghumans@thecyberwire.com. We would love to hear your catch of the days. All right, Joe, I recently had the pleasure of speaking with Alex Hinchliffe. He is from Unit 42 at Palo Alto Networks, and our conversation centers on some of the research they've been doing when it comes to ransomware. Here's my conversation with Alex Hinchliffe.
Our counterparts in our fairly newly formed incident response team called Unit 42 Consulting, that's formerly Crypsys, they were working some cases with some victims from this particular ransomware, and the collaboration between the two teams, that's the consulting side doing the incident response and the threat intel side where I am, have been collaborating and sharing information a bit more freely recently. So we just simply came across this case for quite an interesting ransomware, and it's interesting for various different reasons, but we picked up on it and worked on it together and then published a blog.
Well, let's go through some of the details together. I mean, certainly at this point, I think most folks are familiar with what ransomware is and how it works. What are some of the things that set this Mespinosa group apart?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Ransomware has been around for many, many years. I mean, since the 1980s, I believe, if I'm correct in thinking back that far. But lately, I guess since about 2010, 11, in a more prevalent fashion, and has evolved over those years. But more recently, we're seeing this kind of what we call a post-intrusion ransomware and more targeted ransomware that looks a bit more like a traditional breach, where there's some kind of spearhead into a victim organization, and then instead of simply deploying ransomware on one system and asking for some money, they grab credentials, they move laterally, they try and deploy their ransomware to as many hosts as possible and effectively bring into question that business viability. So that's the kind of breed of ransomware that we're talking about here. What sets this apart slightly differently is they actually install a backdoor, which we call Gasket, this particular Trojan that we've called Gasket, to provide another communication mechanism, command and control mechanism with the victim systems. And that is a bit different. I mean, with ransomware, it's quite rare to see any command and control traffic from ransomware, because once it's deployed, the communication, if you like, to the victim is through a ransom note that says, you need to pay us, and this is how to go about doing it. Call this number or email this address. In this particular case, they actually set up a secondary communication mechanism, presumably that if the organization kicked them out and managed to restore from backup and do these other things, potentially they might have a way of getting back in and trying again.
Wow. Well, can you walk us through how would someone find themselves a target of these folks, and then what would get you infected?
Yeah, so from what we've seen, and obviously it's through our kind of aperture on the world, through our telemetry and through the incident response cases that we've worked, it's always been through a remote desktop protocol from Microsoft systems. What we've seen is that quite often, especially post-pandemic, with more people working from home, more people trying to do their learning from home and everything else, that the remote desktop and remote capabilities have increased. And a lot of organizations are exposing this unnecessarily on the internet. And in this case, Mespinoza will effectively scan the internet looking for remote desktop protocol systems and then try and compromise that system and get access to the network. What we've seen at Unit 42 is they've never used vulnerabilities to take control of the system. So they've never used a bug, if you like, in the RDP service or any other remote control software. It typically is using credentials. We don't know how those credentials came to be in possession of the Mespinoza group or where they were compromised, but essentially they've got these credentials and they can get their way into the RDP system.
And what are their capabilities? I mean, once they get a hold of someone's system and they're able to, have purchase on that, what can they do within?
Yeah, so once they get access, I think this particular group, I wouldn't say they're the fastest. That there have been some media reports talking about ransomware that can effectively hold an organization compromised in a matter of minutes or hours. In one particular case that we worked with Mespinoza, I think it was about 3 days or just under 3 days from the point at which they breached the network. Once they were in, to your question, they dumped credentials and they managed to harvest credentials from various different systems like Active Directory, which controls all the usernames and passwords on a corporate network typically, but also systems like PuTTY and WinSCP and other tools that are used to communicate with other systems. And they store session information in them. So they use tools to gather as many credentials as possible, which helps them move around the network. And once they have enough of the network compromised, and indeed, like some other ransomwares, they even use wake on LAN technology to try and wake up hosts on the network that may have been shut down or put to standby mode so that they can get more and more victims. Once they have all that, they essentially use a centralized server to deploy the ransomware and execute it on every single system.
Now, before they start running the Mespinoza ransomware itself, is it right that they go through an exfiltration process as well?
That's right, they do. And that's not the case with every ransomware, but it certainly seems to be quite a popular technique, this kind of double extortion technique, where, yes, they will exfiltrate data, hold that hostage as well, potentially, leak some of it on a leak website, which they have, and then essentially use it as leverage for getting payment. And what they typically do in the case of Mespinoza is that they search and enumerate lots of different file types on all the victim systems, looking for certain keywords around finance and confidentiality and PII information about employees and things like that, and even some more sensitive terms like illegal and fraud, potentially trying to find, if you like, any dirt on the organization or anything that they've been involved in that could provide even more leverage for the ransom demands.
One of the things that you all point out in your research here is that this group seems to be a little cocky. They have a certain amount of swagger in their communications with their victims.
Yeah, certainly. And I think we were debating whether to call them kind of arrogant. In their ransom note, they have a mini kind of FAQ section about what's happening and how to get in contact and how to get files decrypted and so on. And there's one question in there which is what to tell my boss, and the answer is protect your system, amigo, which actually stands for the acronym PYSA or PISA, which is the alias for Mespinoza. So Mespinoza is also known as PISA ransomware. So yeah, that's quite interesting. They call their victims partners because I guess that with some of them they're doing financial transactions, getting the ransom payments from their victims. So it's almost like a business transaction to them. They call them partners. And the leak website as well is the style sheet, or the theme, if you like, of the website is like an old BIOS interface from a PC, 10 years ago, which kind of indicates maybe that they are kind of nerds or geeks and they like that kind of interface, but it's also, again, a little bit cocky.
Right. You enjoy this sense of whimsy while you're being extorted for money.
Yeah.
What are your recommendations then? I mean, for folks to best protect themselves against this, what do you suggest?
Well, I think there's multiple things that can be done. And since in this case we're talking about the initial entry point being across the network and across the internet using RDP, that certainly organizations need to understand their footprint, if you like, or their attack surface area, especially when it comes to the network. And so whatever is visible to them if they were scanning themselves from the internet is clearly visible to anyone else with access to the internet. So I think they need to understand more about what's connected to the internet and lock down whatever they can. So expose less to the internet, and whatever is exposed to the internet, make sure it's as secure as possible in terms of credentials, multi-factor authentication, and also protecting it behind a VPN or a firewall or something like that. I think once the ransomware once the attackers are in the network, and once the ransomware is about to be deployed, I think endpoint protection really plays a good role here. And there are especially more modern endpoint protection, which can look at behavioral techniques, typically can understand when a program is looking like ransomware, because most ransomware does the same stuff. They enumerate all the files on a hard drive, try and find the ones they're interested in, make a copy of them, encrypt that copy, and so on. So actually, it's relatively easy to spot ransomware when it's running. So if you have the endpoint protection to cover you, then that's good. And in this particular case, a bit like some of the other post-intrusion ransomware actors, they use lots of tools, typically open source tools for pen testers and system administrators. And those tools in this case are used for scanning the network and looking at all the open ports on the network and various other things that help the actors move as quick as they do through the victim network. So looking at things like use of PowerShell scripts to communicate with the registry and disable security products or communicate with Active Directory, those kind of things. And again, quite unique to this group is the backdoor Trojan that they installed in the victim systems. And actually that communication channel, it has two. One is HTTP, the other is DNS. And I believe it relied mainly on the DNS one. So actually, if you have the ability of detecting DNS tunneling traffic, and in this case, it used text records, which are very rarely used and quite suspicious. Again, you have a way of, if you're monitoring DNS logs or have protection in place to look for dodgy things happening with regards to DNS, then you have a chance of detecting this kind of activity.
So is it fair to say that this group is relying more on the speed at which they can do things rather than being stealthy?
Yes, I'd say so. I mean, with ransomware, it's hard to be stealthy anyway, because often, you render a computer almost useless anyway. You often throw up a message saying, "Hey, you're encrypted. Pay us 1 Bitcoin, and you can have your files back." So in that sense, it's far from subtle. But yeah, I think with this group, once they're in, they have the tools, the discipline, and now the experience. I think they've been active since about April 2020, so quite a while. They're gaining experience, they're evolving, so they are pretty brash, pretty quick off the mark to fulfill their mission.
All right, Joe, what do you think?
Dave, ransomware is now like a feature of a full-scale penetration. Right? It used to just be that it would just be something that these guys let loose in your network or hopefully got you to install something. But in a penetration, these attackers are spreading through the network. They're elevating their privileges. They're installing backdoors, which is terrifying because that just helps them maintain continued access.
Right.
They even wake up sleeping or computers that have been turned off with this wake on LAN feature. They send all the IPs in the range a message and then scan the range again to see if computers come back up. Because you could have a computer off that's sitting there. If it's connected to the network and has wake on LAN, I hadn't even considered this as a threat vector, but it is.
So in the middle of the night, all the your computers are shut down at your office, but
right. Like even if your users shut the computers off at the end of the day, these guys can still turn them on if you have wake on LAN enabled.
Wow. Okay.
They steal all kinds of data, and then they install the ransomware in an attempt to monetize the attack directly. I find it interesting that these guys are accessing everything via remote desktop protocol or RDP. For any of our listeners that don't know what that is, remote desktop protocol is a very useful tool for computers within a network that let you essentially act like you're sitting at the computer itself.
Yeah, so you remotely access someone else's computer.
Right, but you're literally sitting there looking at a Windows desktop. It's not like you're on the back end talking through a terminal or something.
Right, okay.
So you get the full Windows experience. And people are putting these systems, according to Alex, they're just putting them out there on the internet. I don't doubt that at all. But that's really bad. It's essentially like taking a computer that's on your network and putting it out on the street.
Right.
Would you do that? No. No, you wouldn't do that. You should at least be putting that thing behind a VPN.
Yeah.
And then using multi-factor authentication on that VPN to make sure that the user who connects to it is authorized and not some impersonator. These things are very easy to find when they're exposed. If you just put an RDP server on the internet, it is a very simple matter to scan that IP address and find if the RDP ports are open. It's trivial, in fact. In fact, it's trivial to scan the entire internet and get back a list of IP addresses that have the RDP ports, the default RDP ports open. And it's very noisy, but if you do that massive scan from one location while you're conducting your attack from another location, it's fine. It works just great. So don't think that just by putting something out on the internet and going, well, nobody's ever going to look here. Every attacker is always going to look there.
Right.
They're going to see it.
But they're just systematically scanning everything.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And they're doing it all the time, looking for new targets. Alex said once they found the RDP system, they're not hacking in, right? They're not using any exploits. They're just using credentials to get into these systems, which means these credentials were somehow phished before. Well, guess how you stop using people from using phished credentials? Multi-factor authentication again.
Right.
So if you have multi-factor authentication, not only if you had this thing out there, you shouldn't have it out there, but you should have it on the VPN, but you should also have it on the remote desktop. You should have Active Directory using multi-factor authentication. Or perhaps the new passwordless thing you talked about today with Microsoft.
Right.
That could work. Speed is key for these guys. 3 days is remarkably fast. About a year ago, we were talking about the average time to discovering someone's in your network being like 6 months.
Yeah.
And now, these guys are not going in there to do reconnaissance for 6 months and stick around in your network and maintain a presence and observe. They're actually going in there with, essentially doing a smash grab and disable. Right. So, but 3 days to get in there, do all this stuff and get out and then demand a ransom is remarkably fast. They call their victims partners, which is kind of bold, I think. And one of the things that Alex said that's key is these guys have been around since 2020, and as they practice their skills, they really, really, really get a lot better at them.
Yeah.
So they're only going to get more efficient at doing this.
Yeah, lots of refinement that goes on. They
They
have the ability to iterate quickly.
Yes, they do.
Yeah. All right. Well, again, our thanks to Alex Hinchliffe from Unit 42 at Palo Alto for joining us. We do appreciate him taking the time. We want to thank all of you for listening. That is our show. Of course, we want to thank the Johns Hopkins University Information Security Institute for their participation. You can learn more at isi.jhu.edu. The Hacking Humans podcast is proudly produced in Maryland at the startup studios of Data Tribe, where they're co-building the next generation of cybersecurity teams and technologies. Our senior producer is Jennifer Iben. Our executive editor is Peter Kilpie. I'm Dave Bittner.
And I'm Joe Kerrigan.
Thanks for listening.